Hello, dear students. Welcome to Digital Learning Department of Collegiate Education. Myself, Khalil, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce. Okay. Course BBM, semester 5th, subject management, paper business, research methods, topic means unit research methodology, and subtopic. Today's topic type 1 and type 2 errors. Okay. uh, Especially in the previous session we discussed about type 1 error. No, in this section we will discuss about type 2 error. And once again I welcome all of you in this session. Okay, as you are aware that in the previous lecture we discussed about introduction of a type 1 error, basic concepts concerning testing of hypothesis, meaning and definition of type 1 error, causes, probability, and example of type 1 error. Okay, in this lecture mainly we will talk means we are going to discuss about okay, and what is type 2 error. Okay, meaning and definition of type 2 error, and what are the causes of type 2 error, probability of type 2 error, and a small example of a type 2 error, and comparison. Okay, type 1 error versus type 2 error. See, when we get a result that is contrary to the truth, this is known as making an error in the hypothesis testing. As we all already know, that there are two kinds of errors in hypothesis testing. The first kind of error is type 1 error, and the second kind of error is type 2 error. Dear students, now we will talk about the second kind of error, that is type 2 error. See, the formal definition of a type 2 error is that type 2 error is the error that occurs when the null hypothesis is accepted when it is not true. Okay, means these kind of errors occurs when the null hypothesis is accepted when it is actually false. Means accepting the hypothesis when it should not have been accepted. uh, the type 2 error results in a false negative result. Okay, means type 2 error is equivalent to false negative. A type 2 error is also known as a false negative and occurs when a researcher fails to reject the null hypothesis, which is really false. And dear students, this type 2 error is denoted by Greek letter beta and is also termed as beta error. Okay, uh, the null hypothesis is set to state that there is no relationship between two variables, and the cause effect relationship between two variables, if present, is due to uh, chance. Okay, is caused by chance. And the type 2 error occurs when the null hypothesis is acceptable, considering that the relationship between the variables is because of the chance, means because of luck, and even when there is a relationship between the variables. As a result of this error, the researcher might end up believing that the hypothesis does not work even when it should. Okay, this is about the meaning and definition of type 2 error. The next concept is causes of type 2 error. See, dear students, the primary cause of type 2 error, like a type 1 error, is the low power of a statistical test. This occurs when the statistical is not powerful and thus results in a type 2 error. And other factors like sample size might also affect the result of the test. See, when small sample size is selected, the relationship between two variables being tested might not be significant. Okay, might not be significant even when it does exist. Here, the researcher might assume the relationship is due to chance. Okay, due to chance, and thus reject the alternative hypothesis even when it is actually true. And see, there it is important to select an appropriate size of sample before beginning the test. Dear students, this is about uh, causes of type 2 error. Now we will move on the next topic, that is probability of type 2 error. Students, the probability of committing a type 2 error is calculated by subtracting the power of a test from 1. Okay, if the type 2 error is fixed at 2%, it means that there are about 2 chances in 100. Okay, and that the null hypothesis, that is HO, will be accepted when it is not true. See, the rate or probability of type 2 error is denoted by, denoted by beta, and is also termed as the error of a second type. See, and it is possible to reduce the probability of a type 2 error by increasing the level of significance. See, in this case, the probability of rejecting the null hypothesis even when it is true also increases, in turn decreasing the chances of accepting the null hypothesis when it is not true. However, because these type 1 and type 2 errors are interconnected, reducing one tends to reducing one leads to increase the probability of another error. Okay, uh, therefore, see, depending on the nature of the test, it is important to what determine which one of the errors is less determinantal to the test. For this, if the type 1 error involves with the time and efforts for retesting the chemicals used in the medicine, that should have been accepted. Whereas the type 2 error involves the chances of a number of users of this medicine being poisoned, it is wished to accept the type 1 error over the type 2. Okay, dear students, from the above discussion we can say that type 2 errors occurs when a researcher accepts the null hypothesis when it is false. The last uh, concept, that is the uh, example, type 2 error example. Okay, see, for this, let us take an hypothesis where a shepherd thinks there is no wolf in the village, and he wakes up all night for 5 nights to determine the existence of the wolf. If he sees no wolf for 5 nights, he might assume that there is no wolf in the village where the wolf might exist and attack on the sixth night. In this case, okay, in this case, when the shepherd accepts that no wolf exists, a type 2 error results where he agrees with the null hypothesis even when it is not true. The next concept is type 1 error versus type 2 error. Okay, differences. Basis for comparison. uh, the first difference based on definition. The definition of type 1 error is type 1 error in statistical hypothesis testing is the error caused by rejecting a null hypothesis when it is true. The definition of type 2 error is type 2 error is the error that occurs when the null hypothesis is accepted when it is not true. And this type 1 error is also termed is also termed as false positive, and this type 2 error is equivalent to a false negative. A type 1 error is a false rejection of a true hypothesis, and type 2 error is the false acceptance of an incorrect hypothesis. And this type 1 error is uh, symbolized by Greek letter, that is alpha, but in case of type 2 error it is denoted by beta. Probability of type 1 error is equivalent to the level of significance in type 1 error, but in case of type 2 error, the probability of this kind of error is equal to 1 minus power of the test. Okay, see, it can be means type 2 error can be reduced by decreasing the level of significance, but in case of type 2 error it can be reduced by increasing the level of significance. Next, this type 1 error is caused by luck or chance, but in case of type 2 error, it is caused by a smaller sample size or less powerful test. And type 1 error is similar to a false hit. Okay, what is it means? Type 1 error is similar to a false hit. Type 2 error is similar to a miss. In type 1 error is associated with rejecting the null hypothesis, but in case of type 2 error it is associated with rejecting the alternative hypothesis. And the last base is the type 1 error happens when the acceptance levels are set too lenient, but in case of type 1 error it happens when the acceptance levels are set too uh, stringent. This is the major difference between type 1 and type 2 error. Dear students, till now we discussed about meaning, definition of type 2 error, causes, probability of type 2 error, and one example of type 2 error. Okay, and lastly, the distinction difference between type 1 and type 2 error. Okay, comparison. Now it's a time to conclude this session. Dear students, from these discussion we can conclude that see, hypothesis testing is the sheet anchor of empirical research and in the rapidly emerging practice of evidence based. However, empirical research uh, and In hypothesis testing have their limits. Okay, the empirical approach to research cannot eliminate uncertainty completely. At the best, it can quantify uncertainty. See, this uncertainty can be of two types. One is type 1 error, means falsely rejecting a null hypothesis, and type 2 errors means falsely accepting a null hypothesis. So, the acceptable magnitude of type 1 and type 2 errors are the set in advance, okay, and are important for sample size calculation. See, another important point to remember is that we cannot prove or disprove anything by hypothesis testing and statistical tests. We can only knock down or reject the null hypothesis and by default accept the alternative hypothesis. If we fail to reject the null hypothesis, we accept it by default. Dear students, these are all the books reference. Mm, For further information, refer these books. In these slides, I have provided uh, two internet reference links also. You can refer these internet links for further information. Thank you all. Have a nice day.